Welcome to the Two Disabled Dudes podcast. We believe life is about how we react. Howdy. Welcome to the Two Disabled Dudes podcast.
Howdy, partner. Glad y'all here. Well, thank you, Kyle. This episode is brought to you in part by Reata Pharmaceuticals, who have generously sponsored many episodes in Season 9. So we want to say thank you to Reata. Kyle, I've been dying to talk to you about this.
All right.
I just got a new bed.
Nice.
Just a reminder, right? I a couple years ago moved in, rented a room from folks in a house, so a different setup than what I've been used to. So not my bed, right? My bed is currently in a storage unit, a storage company with which I have an inordinate amount of disdain for.
Yes.
However,
Understood.
the bed I've been using is theirs, right? So anyway, it's been a couple years, so I'm like, I can't do that. It's too soft. Like, I wake up often with a sore back and sore muscles. So we finally got a new bed, a new mattress. And I absolutely love it. It's firm, beautiful night's rest last night. It was very comfortable. However, do you remember a couple episodes we were talking about the hotel and the bed being way too high?
Oh, yeah.
Well, my bed now, way too low.
Freaking 3 bears.
Yeah, right. It's insane. The bummer is I'm stuck with it, right? This is in my bedroom. This is not like I can pick another hotel room or hotel. So it's a beautiful frame that's, I got the drawers underneath the mattress and a headboard and a footboard and so on. So it's pretty well set, the size, and we did a memory foam. So anyway, now the mattress lines up with the footboard. So it's really easy to stub my toes on it and little things like that. And then, of course, walking around the bed, it's now a good 4 inches lower than I'm used to, which isn't bad. But for 2 years, I've been used to a certain level or height. So it's just a matter of getting used to it. It's not like it's horrible. It's just probably going to take a few weeks to get comfortable with my new size.
Well, would you say it's better than too high, though?
Oh, absolutely.
Like too low? Yeah.
And certainly a firmer mattress for me is better than a not firm mattress.
Right.
So overall, it's great. But it's too
Sorry, I have another question here, and I'm going to put you on the spot.
Okay.
Twice during that description, you said we. We got a new mattress.
Oh.
We this, we that.
Oh.
What does that mean?
Well, I got a mouse in my pocket. You didn't know about my pet mouse? No. Well, what I meant was that the bed is for me, and I live in my room alone, but the landlords paid for it. So we worked together to set up the time and pick the right one. Because, I'm not taking it with me when I move out. It'll be something that they hang on to. So
Okay, got it.
we worked together to make a decision.
You can cut that if you want.
Thanks for that permission. FYI, listeners, if you didn't know this, Kyle and I produced this show completely on our own, which is good content for the rest of this episode right after we share our last mental health segment with you for season 9.
We've had Dr. Al on before. We've worked with him several times on different projects, and we just love him as a friend, as a professional. So, Dr. Al, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Kyle. Thank you, Sean. It's a pleasure and an honor to see you guys again and to help out any way I can.
We did a presentation together for a nonprofit organization, and you gave a little presentation about what people with rare disease deal with as far as just the difficulties that we all deal with. Some of the things that you talked about in that talk were uncertainty, isolation, anxiety, PTSD sometimes, sleeplessness, all these things that are caused by the trauma of diagnosis and dealing with rare disease every day. One of the things that you talked about in your practice is that when you meet somebody and you have a conversation, part of what you do is you try to tease out what is due to the disease and what could be an issue that somebody is facing just because they're a regular person or because of something else unrelated to the disease. And that's something that I think about a lot for myself. You know, when we're tackling these things, we want to know the cause so we can address that, right? And if it's not due to my disease, you know, I think we all have a tendency to blame everything on our disease sometimes. Maybe that's a red herring.
Yes, Kyle, as a practicing psychologist, one of my tasks early on when I begin with a new client is to try to collect enough information, like clues in a treasure hunt, that help me to understand them and understand what has led up to and what contributes to whatever their challenges are. And if I'm able to do that, then the client feels understood and then digs in with whatever direction that exploration leads us. And this is true for all clients. For clients who are affected by rare disease, there's an obvious added dimension that's very unusual for all the reasons that we live and you know. And we should mention that I'm not only a practicing psychologist. The reason that I know you guys, the reason I'm in the rare disease world is because of my son Jack, who lived for 26 years with spinal muscular atrophy.
Mm-hmm.
So I've lived this experience and many, if not all, of the challenges that my clients bring to me. The trauma of a life changing diagnosis, the adaptation to a world very different than the world that I'd known before, the uncertainty of how long our baby was going to live. He was given 1 year to live, and we were lucky to have him for 26. But that living that life gave me a window full time into the world of the families that I now serve. And it's easy to assume, and I see this with some of my clients who've interacted with other professionals who assume when they see a wheelchair or they hear about a life-threatening disease that that's the only reason for a person's challenges. And sometimes there are other reasons for a person's challenges. Some are situational reasons, and some are genetically transmitted reasons. Some people are just vulnerable genetically to anxiety or depression or other mental health conditions unrelated to the other rare disease that they have.
We may not know it when we go into an interaction with a therapist or a professional, but if we're interacting with someone who may be taking the wheelchair at face value and not digging deeper and noticing those genetic causes or whatever the other issues are that aren't related to our disease, how do we approach that, think about that, detect that? How do we help with this issue?
If you're a client and going to therapy, you first want to know that the therapist that you're seeing has a breadth of experience that's broad enough to be able to understand enough about what it is like to use a wheelchair,
Mm-hmm.
but also someone who will ask enough questions to draw out of us our histories, our family histories, and the other dimensions of our lives and our families. The very first thing I do with all of my clients is what we call a genogram. It's a family tree going back 2 generations where I learn about the family of origin of the patient, the client, and any unusual events that have occurred in the life of that family and any history of mental health challenges going back 2 generations. And there's usually something there that's important enough to note. It's part of what I said before. I'm collecting clues in a treasure hunt. I'm trying to integrate those clues and to understand a person's story, both situationally, through the family, through genetics, that helps me to help them to see the whole picture of their life in these contexts. Everybody's life is full of many variables and many moving parts and many life events. My job is to fully understand those pieces and how they fit together, how they work together, and how a person has experienced them. So to be a client, you're wanting to be sure to have that therapist know all of the things you want them to know that may be relevant to your situation.
I can understand how that information is going to inform you and your approach. Absolutely. But now I'm curious, do you think there's benefit for the individual to know their family history, maybe in a way that they've never thought about it? And, I assume you can help call attention to things that maybe they never really gave much thought to. Do you think that benefits them at all, or somehow empowers them, or gives them permission to not blame themselves for everything?
Absolutely, Sean. People feel reassured when there's an explanation for what they're experiencing, an explanation for why they feel the way they feel, why their moods may vacillate, they feel sad or they feel worried. Why do I feel this way, Dr. Al? Is this normal, Dr. Al? These are the most common questions I receive. So if I do my job well, I'm helping to answer those questions. But I can't answer those questions without collecting enough clues in the treasure hunt to be able to piece things together. And many people don't know that if their grandmother had severe depression, that that might be relevant to the challenges they're having today, even though the grandmother has been gone for a while. So part of my job is educating my clients and teaching them what they might not know about how these pieces of the clues in the treasure hunt go together. How do they go together? And we all adapt to our version of normal for us. And so sometimes people experience symptoms and experience challenges and they don't question it because they get used to it. And that's true at a different level in rare disease. My example, personal example, is when I was in the mall with my son and chasing him in the mall with his wheelchair. After years of his wheelchair, I hardly even saw the wheelchair anymore. I was just Jack driving.
Yeah.
But other people kind of look at me funny and remind me, like, oh, this isn't typical. Like that looks
Yeah.
pretty stressful, pretty crazy. Other people would remind me, wow, this isn't what everybody else does. So I use that example to highlight what I do as a professional sometimes is draw attention to a person about the fact that what they've adapted to may not be typical either. And oftentimes it's a mood disorder where someone's sad all the time or lacks energy um, and depressed. If they've been that way for 10 years, they might not see that as unusual, as I didn't see my son's wheelchair as unusual. I got used to it.
Right.
We all get used to what we get used to. So part of my job is to be an objective observer, a trained observer, who
Yeah.
then compares their experience with others who I've helped and help to help them to see their situation as a quality of, sometimes it's a quality of life discussion. You're used to this quality of life, but there might be a better quality of life available to you that you might not be aware of.
Yeah.
And here's why. This is the nature of what I do when I'm working with a client, any client, with or without rare disease.
The work you're doing is making an impact for a lot of people, a lot of different people.
Thank you. It feels like the right thing for me to be doing with my career right now. There are many psychologists out there, but I feel called to help our people. I'm one of them, and people affected by rare disease don't often feel understood. And so I guess we can thank my son Jack for being my professor for 26 years, who taught me what I need to know to help our families in a way that's different than what my professors taught me in graduate school. So I feel genuinely called to serve in this way.
Well, we're grateful to have you as part of the community, and Jack always guiding us through you. Thanks so much for this conversation today. I do want to mention that you have a new website called rarecounseling.com. Is that right?
That is correct. I finally have put a website together with a lot of help called rarecounseling.com, so people can find me there. And my daughter will be very pleased that I'm fulfilling my promise to her to tell people now that the website exists.
It's a sharp-looking website.
Thanks, Sean.
We'll be sure to share that with our listeners so they can check you out.
Dr. L, thanks so much for the conversation today.
It's always fun to meet with you guys, and I'll be happy to help any way I can moving forward.
People like Dr. Al are incredibly busy, and they're pulled a million different ways. We're grateful for Dr. Al, Heidi, Shelley, Kate, all the folks that have been a part of this phenomenal segment over the last 4 months. We know there isn't one answer that resolves everything, but the more we talk about it, the more likely we are to be able to navigate the circumstances and situations we're up against, which is and was the entire point of this segment throughout season 9. Listeners, remember, you got this. Kyle, it's the end of season 9, and I want to talk a little bit about what the last few months have been like and what has transpired in my mind and the way I approach life. In full transparency for our listeners, season 9 comes to an end with this episode. And as I mentioned a little bit ago, Kyle and I produce this show on our own. We do the editing, the planning, the scheduling, and so on. As many of our listeners know, we do this show as a hobby. Right, we both have full-time jobs. We both help run nonprofits. Like we got a lot going on. And what started over 6 years ago as something we did in our spare time every now and then, every other week, all those different little things, essentially has morphed into a second job for us. And this past season, in particular, required more time and more effort than ever before, and really more than we realized it was going to take. And at times, life was hard to juggle over the last 3 months.
Yeah, I mean, we doubled our workload this season. You know, it was a lot of work in the past, for sure, in past seasons, but this season in particular, you know, we added the mental health segment, which has been amazing, as I mentioned before. And it's taught us so much, and we've got so much value out of it, but it effectively doubled our workload. We're doing 2 interviews, 2 topics every single episode, and it's been a lot.
You're right, and to help paint the picture for our listeners, generally speaking, you and I kind of rotate the workload per episode. So, for instance, It's not a perfect science, but generally speaking, you will produce an episode, and I'll take that week off, essentially, from editing and the fine-tuning. And then we do another interview or recording, and I'll take the editing and fine tuning, and you take it. So we can kind of plan and work around a manageable schedule. Well, like you said, we doubled our workload, even though mental health has been, 17, 12, 15 minutes. It's a full recording, another calendar, another appointment, another chain of emails trying to find time on everybody's calendar, and more editing. So essentially, you and I have both been editing every week.
Every week.
If you're doing the episode, I'm doing mental health, or vice versa, and we plug all these things in together. So that's what you and I mean when we tell our friends and family we've doubled our workload. and we didn't think about that and how that was gonna flow in the beginning, right? We thought, a 10-minute segment, that's easy. Not so much.
Yeah, and I appreciate that you mentioned friends and family, because I'll get a call or a text from a buddy and be like, hey, you want to go ride on Sunday? You want to ride this weekend? Nope, sorry, got to work on the podcast, which I love, right?
Right.
But it still takes over a lot of other things. And like you've mentioned before, you haven't gotten to the gym in a while consistently, because we're always working on this stuff that we love.
Mm-hmm. And to be fair, and to put some listeners at ease, we're not at all complaining, and we're not saying goodbye. We're just talking through some of the stressors of the last few months that really have caused me, at least personally, and probably you, to just reevaluate priorities and commitments and how life unfolds for us. So some of this stems from not only the workload, but a conversation I recently had with a friend and a coworker. She was asking me about the weekend or what I was doing, and I had said something about, I've got a writing deadline tonight. I've got to get that done. And earlier in the day, we were talking about the RTO that I help plan, and she actually runs. She's a team member on that event. So, she knows that's a lot of work. And then she knows about the podcast, and I think I was getting ready for a trip to LA or somewhere, for something. So she had made the comment, you do a lot. And I'm like, yeah, it's probably too much. And she says, I don't think it's probably too much. I think it is too much. Mm-hmm. And this is somebody, we're not super close, but she's a total outsider just looking at things I'm committed to. And she's like, it might be good for you to step back. It was all coming from a good place, but it caused me to just pause and think as I'm driving home. I'm like, am I doing too much? So I did take a break, a few weeks of writing for the column FN News. And you and I know our podcast comes to an end with this episode, so it gives us a little bit of time off to really just reassess and reevaluate.
Right.
What I started to wonder is, what is too much? Can you identify too much, and what is the threshold to just enough? How do you know what is too much or not enough, or how do you know you have room for more?
Partly, I think both of us would agree that there is such a thing as not enough. Like, I don't want to be sitting around in my apartment all day, for days at a time.
Right.
So, there's some lower limit as well as an upper limit, as you talk about,
And I've always enjoyed and really thrived off of staying busy. Being busy, being productive, doing things is how I'm wired.
Yeah.
And I'm okay with that. But there are times where I wonder, have I gotten myself into too much right now?
Yeah, I specifically remember going on a fishing trip this year with a few friends down in Tampa and having a couple days to not think about anything and just enjoy friends. And I'm thinking about it right now and recalling how good that felt, and it just tells me that it's such a contrast between being in the thick of everything and then, having just a little window outside of that to be like, oh, this, like, I can actually think about, things that I like instead of always needing to accomplish the next task. So I think that speaks to the balance, right? We know there's a lower limit and an upper limit, and there's a balance somewhere in between.
I wonder if that's just the constant work of life. Do you find that balance, or is that something you're constantly working for? 'Cause I think about people with kids or families, right? You don't have a choice. You can't change that commitment, right? Like, you're in it for the long haul when you start having babies.
Right.
But you can maybe step back from your involvement in church or your involvement in the 4-H club or your commitments to this, that, and the other. When I say scale back, I'm not saying quit church. I'm just saying maybe you don't volunteer as much as you used to, or you don't show up to the fair and run the snack bar or whatever. So I wonder, does that ever end? Does anybody ever find the 50-50 point where it's good for many years? Or is it always sometimes too much, sometimes too little, and sometimes you're in the happy spot?
I think it's probably always a struggle, and I don't think you and I are the only ones doing this, right?
Kyle, you talked about not wanting to be somebody that sits in their apartment and watches TV or whatever you said. And I had another conversation with a friend because it dawned on me that maybe I'm somebody that I don't want to be right now. And it's playing with my head even today. So another coworker, a friend of mine, we're in the office, and I asked him, "Hey, how was your weekend?" And he was over the moon thrilled at how amazing his weekend was. It's like, "Oh my God, it was the best. It was amazing, blah, blah, blah." I'm like, "Oh, what'd you do? What made it amazing?" And he was like, "Man, it was perfect. On Saturday, I went up to this area with a buddy, and we played disc golf all day, and we drank beer and just laughed and had a good time. Then a bunch of us went out for dinner Saturday night, and then Sunday, me and my girlfriend and our daughter, we just vegged. We watched TV, we played video games, we ate, we just relaxed, and it was really good. I just feel so well rested." And then, of course, in my head, I'm like, I wanted to punch him.
I was going to say, don't. Doesn't that make you furious? Yeah.
And I'm like, oh my gosh. Because, dude, that's awesome. I'm sitting there thinking, like, that sounds amazing. And in the back of my head, I'm like, I would love a day like that. But I also know it's my fault. I don't have days like that, right? It's not like I don't have, maybe I can't run around and play disc golf. But I can certainly do things that are restful and enjoyable and really not productive in the sense of getting a task done, but just hanging out. And so anyway, I went through a couple days of thinking about his response and his weekend, and I started to think to myself, am I the guy I don't want to be, in the sense that I don't veg, I don't just hang out because work has been a priority. And I don't mean my day job, but I mean being productive, working on the podcast, working on this, that, and the other. Have I become that guy that prioritizes more of the work in life over friends and relationships in life? I don't know the answer to that, but it certainly has me thinking that right now, maybe some adjustments need to be made.
I know the answer to that for me, and I can say with some pretty good confidence is that I have prioritized work and productiveness over some relationships lately, and I appreciate this conversation because it's shedding a light on that. It's not as if I didn't know that was occurring, but I certainly didn't talk about it with anyone. I'm happy to kind of be like, all right, I'm making progress. We're doing good work with the podcast, even if it means not riding my trike as much. Anyone that knows me knows that that's what I love more than anything.
Sure.
But we also need to pay the bills, right?
Sure.
Like, we need to go to work.
Yeah.
We need to get things done. And, if I was just riding my trike every single day and that's all I ever did, God, that sounds amazing. But, I would have a roof over my head
Sure.
and gas in my car.
Sure. So many people work to leave a legacy, right? Or to pass things on to their children, or to, have a home for them and so on. At college, pay for college, things like that. I don't have kids. I'm guessing I probably won't have kids. So in the back of my brain somewhere, there's a tiny little voice that says, who cares? Just enjoy your life.
Yeah.
Go to the beach, go to the city, drink more Starbucks, do whatever you want, because there's really, I don't feel like I have an obligation to leave anything for anybody. So why work so hard to build up a 401k? Don't get me wrong. I believe there's value in a retirement and preparing for my future, but I don't know if that's that important, or it should be that important for me.
I think about that, especially with the family thing, and I've mentioned a couple times, especially when we both turned 40. We had a little bit of a talk, during those times, and a lot of times I think to myself, the family thing is important in society, and it's certainly important to me. Like, I love my niece and nephew, and my brother and my parents, and I mean, family first. However, sometimes I feel like I'm doing something different with my life. Like, there are other things to do, and who's to say what is the right thing? I think partly it's being comfortable with how we spend our time and being conscious that we're spending it this way and not that way, and we're giving up this and we're gaining that. Like you say, being intentional about it so that when we get 20 years down the road, we don't realize we're somewhere else than we had thought we were going.
So speaking of that, how do we avoid it? How do we avoid becoming something we don't want to be, or somebody we don't want to be, or doing something we don't want to do?
This leads me to think of a vision for the future and sort of how we come about that in our minds and in our lives. For me, I am definitely let's see how things go and react in the moment. But I also realize that there's value in a vision that is further than this moment, because that's what we measure ourselves against, right? I think of Reata sometimes. I didn't have a grandiose vision for that for a couple years, probably. In the beginning, it was just ride a few more miles, get to the end of this ride. But it has developed into something that has made a huge impact.
Yeah.
And I wonder if I would have planned ahead in those early years of Reata, if I would have landed in the same place, or slightly different? Would I have been disappointed because I overshot with my vision? Sometimes I struggle with creating a vision because I feel like in a way that sets me up for disappointment.
Yeah.
Because it's never how we envision it, right?
Sure.
But I also see the value, obviously, in planning beyond the current moment. So there's that balance thing again.
It's a constant tug of war there. So I'm curious, Kyle, for you, would you advocate for planning or for going with the flow?
I think both.
Before you explain yourself, I will say I agree with you. I believe there is value and absolute importance in having a plan. If you don't know where you're going, you're never going to get there. But I also believe there has to be a little bit of room for error or for change. So you've got to be comfortable and expect things to just not go as planned. Be okay with that.
Yeah.
So maybe in the moments from day to day, there's some ebb and flow and go with the flow. But overall, there's got to be a vision. Do you have a way of justifying your answer both, or do you want to leave it at that?
I think of Amazon.com.
Wait, what is that?
They were not profitable for 6 whole years. And they had this vision of market dominance. And we all know that that's what they have.
Yep.
But I guarantee in that 6 years, there were so many times when they're like, are we on the right track?
Sure.
Are we even going to get there? This does not look good. There were so many circumstances and situations that they had to react to just get through the moment so that they could end up at their vision.
And they have, as we all know.
With the podcast, we are at the end of season 9. We're really proud of our mental health segment, but we both also realize that we probably won't do it again because we know how much work it is. And maybe not mental health specifically, but we're not going to double our workload unknowingly again.
You're right. It's not mental health specifically, but I do want to add or just echo what you've said. What an incredible experience. Growing, stretching, phenomenal people that we're connected to and were willing to be a part and help us with that. That's irreplaceable and well worth the work. But you make a good point. Probably not going to do that again.
We've got to have that vision, something we want. But it's got to be flexible. We have to understand that it's not going to be exactly the way we see it in our heads. Yeah. We have to react to the situations that we're presented with to make it to that next moment.
Yeah. With that in mind, I think of this very show. When you called me almost 7 years ago and said, hey, do you want to do a podcast? What we have today and what exists was never in my view.
Right.
I'm shocked we've come this far.
Right, yeah. I agree.
It's certainly been a wild ride. And the reality of it is, Kyle, it's only wild because people keep listening. And we have some sort of impact with a handful of people. So a big note of gratitude to those of you who allow us to come into your ears every week or, every now and then. And several companies who have brought us in to be a part of what they're doing on site. All of those things have really helped make what we do here worthwhile. And ultimately, those texts or those random emails that say, I love this episode, or this point really speaks to me, or thanks for talking about X, Y, or Z. That's the kind of stuff that gives me the motivation to push through those late nights or to say, okay, I'm not going to the gym tonight because they gotta edit or whatever it may be. So I guess we owe it all, in my opinion, Kyle, we owe it all to the people that push play every week. I will also add that everything we've talked about today is the reason why we started producing in seasons and the reason why we take 2 months off. So although we are sad that you won't have a new episode for 2 months, we are looking forward to a period of being able to press pause, reassess, go veg, go play disc golf and have a beer or whatever it may be, and rest and rejuvenate for the next season. Which, although we're off for 2 months, Kyle, the reality of it is that means you and I are off for about 3 to 4 weeks before we start planning for season 10.
Bring it on.
Kyle, I've got to give one word of advice before we totally close this out. I know there's no single answer to fix it all or to help us find that balance all the time.
But you'll give us one, I bet.
Well, something, maybe, that applies. This is not mine. I got it from another podcast you and I both love and listen to every now and then. Smartless.
Yeah.
Folks, if you haven't heard it, you've got to check it out. If you enjoy Hollywood and entertainment, the Smartless podcast is hosted by Jason Bateman, Will Arnett, and Sean Hayes, and it's absolutely phenomenal. In a recent episode that I listened to, I couldn't tell you what number it is, they were talking about being busy, right? They do film and Broadway and kids and all three of them have a lot going on. And they just talked about how one time, a long time ago, I think it was Jason, he shared a tip when it comes to being busy and what you commit to. The advice is, when you receive a request to do something and be a part of something, think about that event or that commitment being tomorrow. If that were tomorrow, would you still say yes? Even though it's 6 or 8 months away, you've got to think about being next week. If it was something you would be committed to pulling off next week or tomorrow, say yes. But if you think about it as being something, well, if it were tomorrow or next week, the answer is no, then your answer should still be no.
Yeah, I like that. And sometimes if you think of it that way, you're like, heck yeah, I'll do that tomorrow.
Totally.
Right?
Exactly.
And I think it helps bring a stronger response.
Yep. Kyle, let's wrap this up with our usual thank you notes. At the end of every episode, we carve out a little bit of time to express gratitude, to just help keep our mind and our attitude in a healthy spot. Who are you saying thank you to this week?
As you know, I watched the show Ted Lasso on Apple TV.
Oh, that's why your editing is so slow. No, I'm kidding.
I've been spending too much time watching TV. Yeah. There have been a few slow episodes that were a little bit of a slog this season. And it's like, all right, where is this going? Then this week really spoke to me. And I appreciate being able to watch a show and relate to it and assess my reactions to things and my place in life. Like we were saying earlier, I mean, just reassessing. This show is really helping me personally reassess the way I do things, and I appreciate that. So thank you to the show Ted Lasso.
It's always amazing to me when we are challenged in our lives by the most random of things, such as a scripted TV show, right? Or a random conversation with a stranger at Starbucks. There's little nuggets that just cause you to pause or maybe take a completely different direction in life, all because of the way a butterfly landed on your shoulder one day, or something random. I'm saying thank you to my landlords today. We started off with the bed story, and the we that I kept referring to was them. So thank you to them for just helping me navigate getting a new bed and for making it happen and getting it ordered and installed while I was away at work. Like, they took care of everything, and I appreciate that. So thank you to my landlords.
And thank you to Dr. Al for sharing with us his insights. This episode was brought to you in part by Reata Pharmaceuticals. You can check out our show notes for a link to Dr. Al. If you like what you hear, please share this show with a friend and subscribe on your podcast app. Until next time, keep living with urgency. Thank you for listening to the Two Disabled Dudes podcast. This show is possible with your support. Visit twodisableddudes.com to donate.
Connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app.